What is going on, guys? Welcome to The Reformed Reader, the channel where we review different forms of media through the lens of a Christian who is under the authority of the scriptures. My name is Josh, and today we are going to be doing a book review of The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. Now, before we jump into the review, let's go over what is this book about. When Elwood Curtis, a black boy growing up in 1960s Tallahassee, is unfairly sentenced to a juvenile reformatory called the Nickel Academy, he finds himself trapped in a grotesque chamber of horrors. Elwood's only salvation is his friendship with fellow delinquent Turner, which deepens despite Turner's conviction that Elwood is hopelessly naive, that the world is crooked, and that the only way to survive is to scheme and avoid trouble. As life at the academy becomes ever more perilous, the tension between Elwood's ideals and Turner's skepticism leads to a decision with repercussions that will echo down the decades. Alright guys, if you're new to the channel, the way that I normally structure my reviews is I go over the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good being the things about the book that I enjoyed, the bad being things that I didn't care so much about, and most of the time these are preferential things like writing style or character narrative or setting, those kinds of things. But then I go into the ugly, which is what could be some sin that is steeped into this work that might hold a Christian back from reading it. So let's jump into the good. What were some things about this book that I enjoyed? The characters. The characters in this book are phenomenal. The characters in this book are extremely memorable. Now, I read this book, I think it was at the end of 2020, and the characters in this book have stuck with me ever since. This is such a gut-wrenching story that our two main characters are going through some absolute atrocities that they really cling to you and you really empathize with them. So I really loved the characters. I also the plot is fantastic. Again, it is loosely based on a real place and some real events. However, the setting is fantastic. Now, I don't mean that I am glorifying the setting, but Colson Whitehead definitely does an excellent job of capturing what the 1960s could have looked like in Tallahassee. Now, I can't say 100% because I wasn't there, but I do know there were some embellishments here, but otherwise he does a great job of being able to capture life in the 60s, especially as a young black boy. So he does an excellent job there. Now, characters, setting, but the plot by far. The plot is fantastic. Now, again, this is not your uplifting, edifying book. This is a tragedy. This is an absolute tragedy. So if you're not looking for that, I definitely would not recommend you pick this up right now. But this was actually a required reading for me in my English 102 class several years ago. So I was forced to read it, but I found myself as I was reading it, enjoying it more and more. So I will say, if nothing else, the characters of Elwood and Turner, man, they are so great. Also, the ending was absolutely perfect. Now, I do not want to go into it because of spoilers, but if you know the ending, if you've actually read this book already and you know what occurs in the ending, then I'd be willing to bet that it is, when somebody brings this book up or mentions this book, then it is the first thing that comes to mind. At least it is for me. So that's the good. There was a lot about this book that I enjoyed. Now let's go over the bad. What were some things about this book that I wasn't crazy about? And there's a few things. So again, I read this at the end of 2020. Obviously, tensions were pretty high around this time. There was a lot of rioting and those kinds of things going on. And the writer definitely leaned into that a little bit. I will say that while a writer isn't required to write accurately all the time, I do wish that he maybe didn't lean into the white man bad stereotype, because there is some of that in here. Now, I'm not condoning people that mistreated people of another race just because of the time. I'm not condoning that whatsoever. I would actually condemn that and would even say it's because we are all of one race. We are all of Adam and Noah, right? We can all trace our lineage back to Noah and ultimately to Adam and to the Lord. So we are all one race. So I think it is pretty divisive that we are segregating people by race when really it's ethnicity. And so I personally wish that we would quit saying as a society different races, because there is no different race. We are all of the human race. And I know that sounds like, a bumper sticker type thing, but if we continue to segregate each individual group, then it definitely begins to dehumanize one or the other. And anybody can do that. Anybody can segregate in that way. And so I think that as a child of God, that we all ought to understand and acknowledge and treat others as if they are also children of the Most High God. As a matter of fact, with my son, I tell him to treat his sister like he ought to, that she is a daughter of the Most High God. And so I will say, when it comes to this book, there is some exaggeration there, where our author definitely makes a distinction between white and black. And he's saying that people that are white, especially in the 1960s in Tallahassee, that all of them are bad. And clearly we know that's not the case. Now, I don't think his goal when writing this was to do that. I don't think he was like, well, I'm going to write this book so that I can condemn white people and the mistreatment of black people in the 1960s. I don't think that's the case at all. I think he wanted to write a good story, and he did a good job of that. But he did lean into that far too much, in my opinion. So there was a couple times where I did roll my eyes, and I was like, okay, let's move past some of that virtue signaling and let's get into the story, which is what I'm here for. So just know that going into it, that there is some, there is that a little bit of agenda to say that somehow because someone is white, they are inherently bad. And I would argue and say that's exactly what some people were saying about them in the 1960s. So I would just say, maybe let's not lean too heavy in that. I mean, if we're going to write something that's, based in history, let's try to portray it accurately. Now, again, am I saying that some people didn't experience some of the things that were experienced in this book? Absolutely not. Obviously, I know that is not the case, because I love reading history, so I do know actually what happened and some of the atrocities that did take place within those types of communities. But I just don't think we should exaggerate or embellish to make them worse than they are, nor do I think we should make them better than they are. I think we should tell it as it is, as true. That was really my biggest gripe. Otherwise, I mean, it's a very short book, so the pacing's pretty quick. So this leads me into the ugly, which is what could be some sin that is steeped into this work that might hold a Christian back from reading it. And I break this down into 5 categories, starting with, there went my lights. And we're back. Okay. So the first category is violence and brutality. Now, violence and brutality, I gave a 9. The violence and brutality in this book is very high. This is definitely a book about the mistreatment of black young men in the early 1960s in Tallahassee. And there are some horrible things that took place. There are some horrible things that took place at this reformatory, the real one. There were some absolute atrocities that took place here. And that's what this book is about. This book is about those horrible things that took place to these young men, and the justice that wasn't served for so long and now has since been served on these individuals. So the reason why I gave this such a high score is because it's real. It's real. These types of things really took place, and it is historically accurate. Unfortunately, there are some absolute atrocities that took place towards these people, and it just breaks your heart. And if it doesn't, there's probably something wrong. I mean, it does. It just absolutely breaks your heart to think about what some of these young men went through and how some of these young men died. So violence and brutality, man, it is an absolute none. And there are going to be certain times here where you, the reader, may actually have to put it down because of how brutal things got for these individuals. It's heartbreaking. It really is. It is heartbreaking in a similar way that The Boy in the Striped Pajamas was for me. It's just absolutely heartbreaking. So know that going into it. I gave it such a high score because it's real, because these things really occurred. It's pretty violent and brutal. Pretty much throughout the entire book. So this leads me into category 2, which is sexually explicit content. Now, I gave this a 3, and the reason I did is because I don't remember anything that took place. It's been a little while since I read it, but I will say that it would not surprise me if those things took place. So know that going into it. I think these individuals were mistreated in every way. So do I recall there being anything listed explicitly? I do not recall anything, but that does not mean it's not in there. So just kind of be forewarned that there's a strong possibility that it could be in here. Again, I don't remember anything, but it definitely could be. So this leads me into category 3, which is language. Now, language includes cursing and also blasphemy, and I gave this an 8. The language is pretty high. Again, we're talking about the entire book. We're talking about the mistreatment of others, and so these two young men in particular get talked down to like dogs and treated like dogs. But when we're talking about vocabulary, it's definitely very explicit. So the language is very high. There is quite a bit of blasphemy used in this book. Again, this was a required reading for me, even though it's very difficult for me to get through at times. But just know that the language is pretty heavy. So again, I used this example in one of my previous videos where I said I would not listen to this on audiobook over a loudspeaker in my home with my children present. So if that tells you anything, that's kind of what you can expect here. So I definitely think there's some heavy language. There's definitely some of the heaviest forms of language in here. And I think there's even some of the heaviest forms of blasphemy used in here. So just know that in advance. Now, this leads me into gratuitous inclusions. So is there anything that is diverse and inclusive for the sake of being diverse and inclusive? And I gave this a 5. Yeah, there's a little bit of that. And I talked about that when I was going over the things that I didn't like. Yeah, there's a little bit about that. I mean, I don't want to say that the author was like white equals bad, but I definitely think there's a leaning to that. Now, I cannot speak to the movie adaptation that was made. I think it was a movie because I didn't watch it because it was hard enough reading it. I didn't want to. I definitely don't want to see that. I definitely don't want to see those things being taking place. But yeah, there's definitely some gratuitous inclusion here as far as there being not just a segregation, but definitely a vilification of Caucasians in this book to an extent. And then finally, this leads me into dark themes. And dark themes, I'm going to have to give an 8 because I normally talk about dark and heavy themes. And man, there are some dark things in this book. So there's some very dark, wicked acts that are performed in this book. And again, the reason why it's so high is because it's real. Obviously, I understand this is a novel. This is fiction, but do I doubt these things took place? Not at all. So yeah, it's going to be pretty high. You deal with all sorts of things. And to be frank with you, I really don't want to get into what they are in a descriptive way because it can get pretty heavy. There are things, there are spiritual things that are mentioned in here. There's a lot of psychological trauma. I mean, trauma. That's what this book is. It's physical, emotional, spiritual, psychological trauma towards these two young boys. So yeah, it's going to be pretty high. And so this leads me into the final question, which is, would I recommend this to a Christian? And the answer is probably not. As a matter of fact, I would say no. If I were you, a Christian, I wouldn't read this. And what I mean here is for entertainment. Now, I understand that a lot of us, especially those of you who know me personally and live fairly locally to me, you have probably had to read this as a required reading. Now, if that's the case, then try to get as much out of it as you can as far as, positive things. But man, this book is so heavy. It is so violent. It is so brutal. It's so heavy on the language. It is so dark. There is that gratuitous inclusion steeped into the work. There is that vilification of white people. So, I mean, I can't in good conscience recommend this book to somebody, but I will say that if you've read it to completion, the ending is absolutely fantastic. Now, again, this is my opinion. This is subjective. Some of you may absolutely love this book. You may have read this. It broke your heart in all of the right ways. But to me, man, this was really, really hard to read. Really hard to read for so many reasons. To the extent of I almost took a failing grade on this in my class, but sometimes you got to power through. So would I recommend this to a Christian? No, it's so heavy with the language. It's so heavy with the brutality and the violence. It's so heavy with the gratuitous inclusions. It's so heavy with the dark themes. There is some explicit content in here. So I would not feel comfortable recommending this to my pastor. I would not feel comfortable recommending this to my adoptive little sister, Sarah Grace. I would not feel comfortable recommending this to my son to read. So would I recommend this to a Christian? Probably not. So, guys, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me and listening to me ramble on about a book for a little bit. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you guys have a comment, leave it down below. If you have any questions about this book, I'm happy to answer them. Just leave me a comment. I will get back to you. I answer all of my comments. So, yeah, just leave me a comment down below. I've loved talking to you guys. Again, thank you guys for coming and hanging out, and I will see you on the next one.